Okay, welcome everybody. This is our week 2 on Novel Boot Camp for Script Camp, Word Camp. We are part of the Skill Camp group of servers, which includes Script Camp, which is focused on screenwriting, and this server here is focused on novel writing. So we go from idea to finished draft of a completely new novel in our program here. You can see all of our different other servers that we have behind me here. We're part of Skill Camp, which includes many different servers that have classes to help you reach your life skills, build your life skills to reach your life goals. We've recently added things like Game Camp, which is centered on game design. Film Camp, which is filmmaking, is going to have a new class starting in December as well. We also are going to start in December 6th. There's going to be coding classes on Code Camp. That's going to be a developer lab, 8 a.m. Fridays. And the short film boot camp starts December 14th, Fridays, 11 a.m. on Film Camp. So we're always adding these new classes, new events. These are all live and interactive. There's no pre-recorded stuff. You can join us for Novel Boot Camp, which is currently taking place Saturdays from 12 to 2. This is still in the free, it's our week 2, so it's our last free and public class. So if you want to be in the boot camp, you've got to sign up at scriptcamp.net. You can sign up for membership for as low as $19 a month if you're signing up for the yearly option. It's going to include access to every single event, class, workshop, and writers group on every server. Feature Boot Camp, Novel Boot Camp, TV Boot Camp, which are always running, and the other many boot camps that we have been adding recently. We also have things like labs, where you can bring questions and topics that you'd like to discuss, and up to 5 pages of your work at a time for feedback. Those are twice a week, Fridays 12 to 2, and Saturday from 4 to 6 for screenwriting and novel writing. We also have advanced labs that you can apply for, a novel fellowship starting soon, and lots of other fun genre groups, meetups, events, script swaps, and readings, and things like this happening almost every single day. So we hope that you sign up. Come by scriptcamp.net to get that link to join our Discord server and join any of these live and interactive events. Or you can just stick around for the free ones if you want. There's plenty of free genre meetup groups and things like this happening all throughout the week, especially on Sundays like tomorrow, where we have Crime and Mystery from 10 a.m. to 11. And then we also later that same day have Poetry at 2 p.m., Short Stories, and Fantasy at 5 and 6 p.m. So like 4 or 5 different groups meeting on Sunday. And then, of course, also Table Read at 2 on Sunday. So lots of stuff going on. We hope that you guys will join us.
Is poetry actually running this week?
Sorry, say that again?
Is poetry actually running this week? I thought it was on hiatus for some reason.
Nope. Every Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific.
Yes.
Okay, it was just one time last week then.
Yeah, it was just a one time. IB who runs it couldn't get online, internet problems. So
yeah, it should be back on. All right, so here's our overview of where we are now. We started our week 0 intro class on November 2nd, where we were looking at first pages, outlines and summaries, and kind of broad level assessments of the entire story. We've advanced from there into point of view and emotional impact, and using point of view for maximum emotional impact, using these tricks like withholding point of view or keeping certain things off screen or off stage in order to make them feel more impactful or unfair, or just create more of that just story juice that you need. Today we're going into heroes, villains, and sidekicks, so this is going to go through the process of designing your cast and looking at different arrangements of who is on which side of your conflict, who are your characters working against, who are they working with, what does it mean in terms of their morality, the choices they make, and the arc that it sets them on. We have plenty more classes coming up, so again, sign up for unlimited membership if you want to come to any of these many different classes all the way through the end of January, where we're going to finish that book, or aim to finish that book around February 1st. So we're in NaNoWriMo right now, National Novel Writing Month, and that's why we did our NaNoWriMo prep classes the past few weeks before this class began. And all throughout November, a lot of people all over the world attempt to write a book. They try to fill out at least 50 to 60,000 words minimum. And so you can use November as your heavy work time to get through the first part of your outline, and then as you continue attending these classes, we'll continue to sort of cover other skills and aspects that go into writing different parts of the story. We kind of work more or less sequentially through the story, but we also just kind of hit topics that you can, it doesn't matter if you're a little behind, you can drop in on, for instance, the dialogue class or conflict or whatever at any point, even if you're not very far in your book. So just because you fall behind schedule, I would not use that. I would not say, there's no point in going to the class just because I'm behind. There's plenty of stuff to do in all of these. That's enough from me on the Script Camp side of things. So we hope to see lots of folks join up soon for our new upcoming session, and also upcoming sessions of TV and screenwriting, Fridays 6 to 8, and Sundays 11 to 1. So I actually didn't fully update this outline today, but I have a bunch of new slides on heroes and villains and things like this. This is just kind of the very basics. We are looking at a couple recaps just at the very beginning. Actually, wait, I'm sorry. Is this the right slideshow? Yeah, it is. Ignore this overview. This is not the right overview. So let's reset and recalibrate. We'll start with our glance back at our word counts. We will move on to just a couple plotting tips for pantsers, and then we will go right into character stuff. So designing your cast, protagonist, antagonist, central relationship, things that make characters interesting. These different concepts of good versus evil, evil versus good, stories with all heroes or all villains are all different topics we'll look at today. Okay, let's start with recap. So if you have not yet set your word count goal, I would choose based on your genre and your age group. Remember that younger age groups, shorter books, older age groups, longer books. Your options are basically adults, young adults, middle grades, or chapter books and younger. And these are just a good starting point for where you should set your word count. Usually you should keep a debut under 120 at the absolute most. You can use this to set your daily and weekly goals, because if you're trying to write a book in 3 months, then you would just divide it by 12. And then you're going to get your how many words you should be writing per week, more or less. We've recapped these things a couple times now. You can also divide by... divide by... Why is it 11 here? I guess because we have 11 weeks left at this point.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so that's remaining time left. Got it. Or divide by 77 to get your word count goal for remaining days. If you're writing without an outline, I don't recommend or teach this approach, but we can just give a couple of tips. You might just think about 3 big paragraphs for like your beginning, middle, and end. The beginning being, I don't know, the first 25%-ish of your book. The middle being usually we consider a larger section than the other two, so middle 50%, and the end 25%. So we introduce your character, their goals and obstacles, and we're going to suggest the stakes and motivations, the things they want in the world or the things they can't have, things they have been denied, but things they crave. Something is going to shake them up out of that stasis and normal kind of world. Your catalyst is going to push them towards this break into Act 2, where they're now going to step through a threshold into the upside-down world where they're going to be forced to now approach getting what they want in some new or interesting or different way. That's going to kind of depend on your genre. Or it could be that your character, what they want at the beginning is just to keep everything exactly the same. They're perfectly happy until something threatens or jeopardizes that normality. And then in the middle is about them trying to struggle to get back to that normal, whether it's get back home, stop being lost in the woods, kill the monster, whatever it is. We're trying new tactics, changing course, and growing as a person as they continue to make choices that push them down a pathway. And the path is otherwise known as their character arc, the choices they make and the ways that they change. At the end, that's going to be your biggest crisis. You're going to hit usually some grand culmination of the conflict between your hero and villain, whether that is another person or perhaps a situation or nature or something like that, if it's one of those stories. And by doing things they couldn't do at the beginning, they face their goal, and either they succeed or they fail. And your dramatic argument is going to come down to what case are you making, or what argument are you making about the world or life or human nature through all of this. Maybe it's something like by persevering and trying your hardest and working your best, you will succeed. Maybe that's the story you're building up to. Or maybe you're building a story that's ultimately about how selfishness and viciousness are qualities that will put you ahead of the pack, or something like that. So you, by figuring out that message that kind of boiling it down to that 1 or 2 sentence dramatic argument at the end, then that will allow you to sort of work backwards and help fill in the plot better. But it's just helpful to have some kind of guidepost up ahead. I don't recommend starting a story with absolutely no idea of where it's going or finishing. If that really works for you, then great, but I would at the minimum recommend just think of it in terms of 3 sentences or 3 paragraphs at the least. It will really help you. You don't have to know how those things happen. It just is helpful to know what exactly will happen. Okay, so and then from there on, you're going to be connecting those events and thinking, how can one thing lead to the next? And of course, just sort of writing and seeing what does happen in the kind of gardener method. You're planting seeds and seeing what grows. Okay, that's pantser stuff and recap. Pretty much all finished, so let's go right into cast of characters. So designing your cast of characters, what are characters? They're the fake people that live in stories. They're the ones that the readers are going to put themselves inside, so to speak, in order to experience the story. They're like the vehicle by which we are driving through the story and experiencing it. If the character's in danger, then we feel like we are sort of in danger or frightened. If the character suffers some kind of loss, we're supposed to feel sad. It's very difficult for the audience to feel something if the character isn't also feeling that thing, except in there's exceptions and there's ways that can work. For instance, where the audience understands something about the situation that the character doesn't. Those can occasionally have them not feeling the thing the audience is feeling, and we feel it almost for them, in a way. But in any case, characters, I usually look at them as tools to explore your premise. So if you are coming up with your premise first, which as a high-concept screenwriter, I'm mostly doing this approach, come up with a cool idea first, a cool situation, cool world. From there on, I'm mentally auditioning different characters that would be the ones to go through that story. And so you're kind of looking for who has the hardest, most uphill journey, who has the greatest change to make, who would face some unique setback or have some unique or interesting tactic in pursuing that goal. You typically just want to avoid this idea of, it's just about a guy trying to do this thing. Like, just a guy doesn't tell us that much. It shouldn't feel like it could be a story about anybody at all. There are everyman characters, but everyman characters are kind of more specific than they would initially seem, because in everyman character, like, if they're thrust into an extraordinary circumstance, then they're not, like, they kind of break the rules, or they kind of break the expectations of what an everyman would do. So everyman stories are usually about seeing what the everyman turns into when put under immense pressure. By the end of those stories, they're usually not the everyman anymore. So our main characters are your protagonist, antagonist, and central relationship. We're going to follow the protagonist's journey as the centerpiece of the narrative, and if you are writing a big ensemble or something like this, you might have a lot of characters, but this protagonist is the A story, we say. So the most important one, the most pivotal one, the one that is like the point of all of this. And you can have, there's not really a limit on the number of POVs that you can have in a book. But usually one will take some sort of predominance, like ask, who does the story start with? Who do we open on? And that gives us a clue as to say, this is the most important of all of them. It doesn't have to remain the most important one all the way through to the end, and our focus might sort of shift as the story goes on, but initially we are looking for someone to attach to, or maybe a group to attach to if there's multiple groups in question. That can work too. Like, think of something like in the world that's as dynamic and complicated and morally gray as Game of Thrones. Well, like, the Starks are kind of like the good guys and the heroes, right? Like, not exactly, but they're the closest we've got, so we basically are on their side. We're like, yes, Ned is awesome. He's like a fair and just man. Or what's his, the character Viserys in House of the Dragon. We're like, okay, he's a good guy. Like, basically just wants to help people, wants his family to be happy, is not a sadist or a crazy person, which adds huge points in a world of nothing but tyrants and sadists. Like, lack of villainous traits is going to be where we will gravitate towards liking those characters more. You can twist that and use that against the audience as you please, but if we don't have anywhere else to turn, we will go to our sympathy. You show two characters and one of them kicks a puppy and the other one doesn't, we're going to like the one that doesn't kick the puppy. So the antagonist is opposing the protagonist's goal, no matter the morality of any of those things. Antagonist doesn't mean bad person, and protagonist doesn't mean good person. It's just who the narrative is following and highlighting their perspective more than anyone else. So we are sort of understanding the justifications for what they do. We are seeing more of what they do. They get more screen time, they get more page time, and usually they get more perspective in books too, so we would probably hear more of their thoughts or interiority. You could focus on a bad person as the protagonist or as the antagonist. It's up to you. Central relationship is going to be buddy, romance, rival, mentor, or just sort of like the most important person to your hero or to your protagonist. It could be that the antagonist is the central relationship, which can really work well. In action-adventure stories, it doesn't usually work as well just because they have to, in order for your competent characters who are, competent enough to be in an action story, usually putting them in the same room as the antagonist would mean there's going to be a fight and one of them would die. So you can't always have the protagonist and antagonist be close, in terms of like the most important person to each other, but it can totally work in sort of like a fallen hero type of story, for instance, or one in which we watch partners that are previously aligned and one of them goes down a dark path and the other one doesn't. Like, they can still have ties to the antagonist that really make those stories feel very dynamic. In any case, the central relationship is tied with the journey of the protagonist in some sort of essential way. Usually it's going to either mirror something in the A story, or it's going to reflect a different aspect of their development, or this relationship will showcase your hero dealing with the emotional problem that is holding them back from succeeding in the A story, or something like that. Also, these characters often get horribly killed in horror and action stories just to motivate the main character. What makes a character memorable? Let's get into this in just a second. To begin with, let's start with just any questions on the basics of protagonist, antagonist, and central relationship.
May I ask a question? Can the main character, the protagonist, also be their own antagonist? If that makes sense, that's what I'm asking. Themselves,
Yeah.
be their artists?
For sure, and we see this in like very psychological stories sometimes, or dramas that are about really flawed characters that we're watching them try to succeed, but we're also watching them be their own worst enemy. It's almost like they're villainous, or they have certain traits which continue to get in their own way, like a character that's trying to overcome an addiction in a way. It's like the addiction is sort of like the villain of that story. Or we might look at it as a character that wants to be a good father, but finds that he has anger issues or something like that he just can't like stop himself from snapping at his kid or something along those lines. That could easily be portrayed as sort of the force that's mostly getting in your hero's path. So yeah, in very reflective story types like that, where the hero is mostly dealing with their own issues, they tend to be more psychological and dramatic, but it can definitely work.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks for the great question. Go ahead.
Would that apply to like a survival story with a single character?
I think so. Something like Hatchet by Gary Paulson is an example
That's
of this.
exactly what I was thinking of, yeah.
Right, that's like one of the classics.
But it's like all these things in the environment sort of become the obstacles, so it's sort of like the environment is the antagonist.
Yeah, that's sort of a man versus nature story, but it's with one character on their own, so it's like the external obstacle is all these ways that I need to try to survive, and the internal obstacle is I need to either find the strength to do that, or I need to find the motivation to do that, or I need to essentially, like, a lot of those survival stories are about basically, I need to not give up. So the opposition that's facing them is like despair as much as it is the snow and the rain.
Okay. That applies to Castaway too, I guess.
Oh yeah, and that story basically just has one character in it. And in a world where we only have one character, you gotta find something that is acting as a consistent source of conflict, like whether that's the environment, whether that's a situation, whether that is the character's own traits. Good questions, thank you for those. We're gonna look at, I mentioned a little bit of sympathy and empathy, so let's start with that, and then we'll go into what makes a character memorable, and then we will look at these different arrangements of hero, villain, etc.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
About likable villains. Like, I love Dexter. You know, Clay turned me on to it, and it's great. And he's a villain, but he's also the protagonist. He's a likable villain, you know? So, do you write a likable villain by making them the protagonist or making them sympathetic? And do you do that by showing them as being, you know, just like everybody else, that they're human, but that does happen to be a villain? Or Despicable Me, he's the villain, but he's lovable.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I have a bunch of slides on this topic today that we'll get to pretty soon, but
Okay.
just to preview.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of ways to approach that. One of them is that your villain is sort of aligning himself against those that we deem worse. So that's in Dexter's case. We sort of root for the somebody who is willing to do those bad. We sort of take the fact that he's willing to do sociopathic things, and that that becomes a sort of heroic trait in a sense, because he does the things that nobody's willing to do to those who get away from justice or whatever, right? So we kind of want to see those villainous tendencies applied towards those who are worse. So that's one way to approach it. That's a very anti-hero style approach. Another way you could portray it is the hero, or your villainous protagonist, doesn't understand fully that they are evil, or is convinced that they're not evil, or something like that. That sort of falls into the unreliable narrator area. We'll talk about that much more in a couple slides, but that's just like your preview for now. So you can either try that by building sympathy for them, making us feel for them, or pitting them against those that we think just deserve it, or like we can use those villainous traits and tactics to the advantage of the good side.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Thanks for that question. Okay, so we, by default, an audience like the general audience, we can't make that many assumptions about them except for these. We can make the assumption that audiences feel sympathy for people in distress, just because we have to imagine, given like all things being equal, most people don't want to see others in pain or getting hurt for no reason. Absolutely, we crave to see, like, it is etched deep in the dark channels of human nature to crave to see those that we disagree with, or those that we want to fight, or those that are trying to hurt us in pain, or we want to see those enemies defeated. But by default, we don't want to see a vulnerable entity be harmed for no reason. You can make that assumption about the audience. There might be various individuals within the audience that have bizarre sadistic tendencies or whatever. But in any case, we can imagine that audiences will feel sympathy for those in distress. If you open a story and it's about we are seeing a turtle crawl across the street very slowly, and there's a truck coming, who are we rooting for, the truck driver or the turtle? Probably the turtle, I would think, right? Maybe then we would go into the truck and see this truck driver is trying to get his pregnant wife to the hospital, and then it becomes complicated, right? But by default, if we just see turtle and truck, we are on the side of turtle. We naturally want the hero of a story to succeed because we want to root for someone to succeed. And the more difficult that journey, the more badly we want to see them achieve that goal. We might think they're like me, or I feel their pain, or that poor turtle. Film especially has the ability to make us feel what a character feels by seeing, like in a visual way, but books have this amazing ability to make us feel what the character feels in a mental way, or by literally experiencing those things through that person's skin. Like we can feel, like you can do things in a book that you couldn't do in a movie. We can feel the blisters in people's shoes. We can hear the thoughts in their heads. We can flash through their memories. We can do all the stuff that would just be much more difficult to do in film with relative ease in a novel. We find characters fascinating in lots of ways. Sympathy and empathy are going to be some of those first ones, and we're going to follow those unless we have something else to choose. If we do have other traits to focus on or to look at, we being the audience here, we might find the character fascinating because they are better than we are in some way, like they are particularly good at something, or they're really scary, or they make us feel like they just make us feel something. They make us laugh. They're really clever. They think of stuff that we never would have thought of. They're insightful. They're poignant. They have some talent that we don't have. They have some way of perceiving the world that we don't have. All of those things, that like sense of specificity and these concrete traits that make these characters sort of better than us, are all things that just will draw our attention. Even a cackling villain might command some sort of intense social power that we can't help but admire in a way, especially if they have a sense of style to them. Like, think of someone like Freddy Krueger. Never does a kind or decent thing in, like 8 movies, but he's kind of loving being evil, and he has a sense of, I don't know, showmanship for some reason. I don't exactly know why, but he likes being evil so much that he has funny one-liners, and he's always like cackling about what he's never like conflicted or feeling bad. He sort of, and he has a distinctive costume and a hat that he always wears, and he seems to think of himself as very cool, despite the fact that he's a disgusting-looking, heavily burned serial killer with a knife hand, you know. So there's lots of ways that you can sort of make a character appealing, or make a character fascinating and interesting, and like essentially characters unapologetically being themselves are always something that will draw us to them. We like characters that make bold and strong choices that are different from what we see every day. And we like to see characters that are sort of comfortable in their own skin at whatever it is that they do. They don't apologize for things. They go for what they want. They are active. They pursue their goals. They make plans. They attempt things. They're not like passive. They don't just sit back and do nothing. If you do have a lead character that is more passive or internal, then it would be very helpful to be closer in terms of psychic distance so that we can experience the story through their mind. We can watch a whole story of them just imagining, what if I was a hero in this instance? What if I fought the bad guys rather than just letting the bank get robbed, or whatever it is, right? Like, the more that we are inside the character's head, the more you can have a passive character actually make sense in a book. Books can have much more interior characters than movies can. Any questions on sympathy and empathy? Okay, we will go ahead then into hero, villain, whatever, as I call this slide here. So I'm still arranging. These are newer slides, so we're still figuring out the exact arrangement of the text. So apologies if any of this is too small to read. But we're going to look at some different arrangements of casts. Everything from your standard paradigm of good versus evil and with good winning, to evil versus good, oops all heroes, oops all villains, fallen hero, ascended villain. I think some of these examples are not the ones I ended up settling on. But in any case, let's dive right into our examination of different paradigms of morality and protagonist-antagonist dramatic relationships. So to begin with, good versus evil is what we grow up hearing a lot of, because something about this story is just inherently comforting and makes for good entertainment for younger audiences, because it reaffirms lessons that we would just ideally like to be true. Good versus evil stories center on the conflict between sides whose philosophies tend to boil down, essentially evil being defined here as selfishness, power, and instant gratification, versus generosity, empathy, and collective success, delayed gratification. I know this is all very centered in the Western ideas of good and evil, and worldwide there are many different ideas of what makes good or evil. But generally within the largest story, like the Western storytelling traditions that provide some of the biggest mass market entertainment in the commercial space, it's sort of about selfishness versus generosity. These are tangible forces in some worlds too, like the light side or the dark side of the Force, which actually offer access to completely different powers depending on the actions that you take, which are clearly morally quantified by the universe, because the universe seems to know if what you did was good or bad. It doesn't really matter why you did it in terms of the Force. It really just matters what it is that you did. So clearly actions themselves are evaluated by some sort of external power, whether that's the Force itself, or is there some kind of god of the Force? We don't really know. But in any case, there is an objective, morally good and evil power within the world of Star Wars. Lord of the Rings is a similar kind of arrangement, though it's a little bit more complicated and more around these ideas of hope versus shadow necessarily than light versus dark, though there is still a very strong element of like shadow being this ultimate darkness, this selfishness, this all-consuming industry, this ravenous, hungry quest for power, or this pursuit of power. Protagonists in these stories are usually aligned with the empathetic side, and they choose to stay on that side despite various challenges. And usually these stories are not going to be about extensively testing to see if you will remain good in the face of evil, though they can be, definitely. Their journey can explore the difficulty of selflessness and integrity, but ultimately the characters in these stories will make the right choice. Good usually triumphs at the end, again, because this is just a theme that we tend to like as humans. It just feels better and is satisfying and lovely and good, and although you might feel like it's such a foregone conclusion, for many years of your life, we didn't really know this. This might be kind of a new idea. Imagine somebody being brand new to stories. This might be kind of a new concept to them, that if you work hard and choose the right path and love your friends, the power of friendship will help you blast the villain with a giant energy beam, The kind of Marvel movie thing where the power of friendship is too strong. In any case, these victories are going to reaffirm that moral order, such as think of Aslan's sacrifice in Narnia, which is that very much in the Jesus kind of tradition, as is Harry Potter, as is The Matrix. All of them fall into this kind of ultimate self-sacrificing, self-sacrifice kind of is at the heart of the Western understanding of good. So we see these heroes that are willing to literally give their own lives in order for the good side to prevail. And sometimes we see redemption for the villains too, where the heroes are so good that they're able to convince the villains that their path is wrong or misguided, and they bring them around to the good side even if it's too late. The alternative of this is to subvert the idea, something like No Country for Old Men, in which we're sort of saying, well, no, good isn't strong enough, or good doesn't matter, or good is irrelevant, or good never existed. Can you guys give some examples of good versus evil stories, and maybe why you like them, why they stand out to you? Anything else you notice?
Harry Potter.
Yep. Hard to root against an abused orphan, right? Like an abused kid who has...
And even
Go ahead.
I mean, even the class that they learn, defense against dark arts. Like, it says it all.
Right, exactly.
I will say that I feel like it lacks, even with knowing it's a kid's book, it lacks some kind of intrigue in the villain, because Voldemort is just evil he just wants to kill all muggles and kill anyone who likes muggles and rule the world. You know, there's no kind of like why he wants to do it or anything like that.
Yeah.
Whereas in the film series, you then get Grindelwald, who has a reason. He was affected by the war. He perceives another war. He feels that wizards have the power to look after muggles, which means basically controlling them. But at least he's got a reason for it, you know?
That's a good point.
Star Wars, they're drawn to the dark side because it's a power that like draws them in, you know, whereas also Harry Potter is just literally good guys versus evil guys, and there's no nuance to it.
Yeah, I think that the nice thing, though, is that we get some other villainous characters that do have a little bit more dimension to them, like Umbridge or people like that. Or you might think in Lord of the Rings, someone like Sauron, his villainy is not that explored in the main trilogy. But Saruman actually is a sort of fallen hero and has that. So, like, I think if you have that sort of, like, just Nazi evil, ultimate evil, it's best to have other evil characters that align with that evil for different interesting reasons. Go ahead.
Like, Snape's always interesting, and I find it really funny that if you ask most people who they think is more evil that have read the books, either Voldemort or oh my god, I've got a name. You literally just said it.
Umbridge.
It's Umbridge, without a doubt. There is something about her sickly sweet fake demeanour and what she does to Harry, to the other kids when she's in charge of that school, that is just... At least Voldemort will just kill you, you know?
Yeah, Voldemort doesn't have a sense of self-righteousness. He's like, I'm evil.
No. Exactly. So,
great points.
I was going to mention Lord of the Rings, you know, and Harry Potter, but she beat me to it. But also, you know, the stories in both the Old and the New Testament. I'm not that familiar with Islam, but the stories in the Old and the New Testament. I'm not trying to get religious. I'm just simply saying that they're usually the theme is good and evil.
Yeah, great point. A lot of Abrahamic religion stories do have this sense of good versus evil, with kind of God and his perspective taking that, like, basically, if God does it, it's good. It's good because it is connected with God, and it's evil because it's separate from God, or apart from him, or opposing to him, or opposing him.
On that, that sort of
like Requiem.
Sorry, too many speakers at once. We'll start with Becky, then I think I heard Megan.
I was just going to say, on that point about with the Abrahamic religions, I also noticed that some cultures, though not all, some cultures tend to have good versus evil at the foundation of their fables. So I guess it's a kind of morality exploration.
Definitely. Yeah, a lot of, religious texts are kind of about defining what is good and what is evil. Like, these stories are almost entirely designed around the concept of illustrating people dealing with these concepts in different ways.
Yeah.
Was somebody else speaking? Go ahead.
And then you have something like Requiem for a Dream, where the fight between good and evil is a fight between good and evil within ourselves.
True.
Right? Do we choose to... What route do we choose to take? Do we choose to do things that we know are wrong to benefit ourselves because we've chosen a route that leads to destruction?
Right. And that one is a little more complicated than most, I would say, good versus evil stories, because although all the characters start out like relatively sympathetic, some more than others. Like Jared Leto's character is pretty awful, even from the opening scene. And then we sort of like build sympathy for him as it goes along. Whereas in more traditional good versus evil or even downfall type stories, we would start with him being like the best son ever. But like the opening scene of that movie is him yelling at his mom and trying to sell her TV, right? So it's like it's a little bit more complicated than the standard paradigm here. But I see what you mean, and yeah, that's very much like that kind of. We're basically rooting for everyone, but they just like the evil, either addiction or selfishness, or like just they keep falling victim to their worst traits and getting in their own way and ruining their own lives. let's look at evil versus good. All right, so this I'm defining as we are with the POV of a. Sorry if that text is too small. Maybe I'll make that a little bigger. But we are with the POV of an explicitly kind of morally wrong side, and that has to mean that either. Well, it can mean a couple things, or we can approach this in a few different ways. Let's look at this. Whoop, here we go. So, either these characters are going to revel in selfishness and cruelty. That can work. I'm hearing a siren through someone's mic. Would you guys please mute your mics by clicking the gray microphone icon? Thank you. So either they're going to revel in selfishness and cruelty, which is a little bit more rare to find, but you see it in horror stories and things like this more. Things like American Psycho, or are stories where the character either conceals their true nature around others because they know that and they sort of pretend to be good so they can fit in with society, or they might be some kind of horrible recluse that just lives by themselves. Or it may be the case where your character operates in some sort of disjointed moral reality where they think that they're not that bad, and maybe the story is about them trying to convince you that actually they were justified the whole time, something like Lolita. They may be out of their minds or influenced to evil in some way, like even, I'm mentioning a couple Stephen King stories here, but even Cujo in the novel, this kind of gets lost in the movie, but it's implied to maybe be possessed by a demon, and Cujo was actually a good boy. And we have some chapters from his POV where we see that he's like, ultimately, he's just a nice doggy, but he is twisted and corrupted by something. And then we have Carrie, who that is an evil versus good story, more or less. And we are rooting for the good person that gets corrupted, we're still sort of rooting for them even as they take their big heel turn, which is where they, a previously good character does something unforgivable. We sort of are still on their side because we see why they were pushed there, or at the very least we kind of hope that they get out of it pretty lightly. Something like Joker also takes this route where it's like the hero does increasingly bad things, but we see how they got there, so we kind of, in a sense, still are loyal to them. There's a couple other ways to approach it too. Your protagonist the protagonist of an evil versus good story might be unreliable, detached from empathy and social norms to the point where they embrace evil or what society considers to be bad in order to get their way. Their POV might center on their flawed or monstrous desires, casting morally good actions or people as obstacles or just irrelevant to their goals. They might not know exactly why they're evil, but if they get curious enough, they often will end up drifting back to neutral or good, because if you keep peeling back the layers of it, often you'll realize, if I do selfish things, it will make people not want to work with me. So if the character gets too curious, then typically it results in them redeeming themselves to some extent. Ultimately, though, these stories can really challenge the audience and either by refusing to redeem the protagonist, or even sometimes saying, well, they made the right choice by doing the evil thing, or by taking that dark pathway. Then we can build the dramatic argument that evil, in this case at least, is stronger or better, or maybe has advantages over good. The result is kind of unsettling and forces the audience to confront that nature of evil from within its own point of view. Any thoughts on evil versus good, or stories that center on evil characters?
I have a great example. Probably one of the first examples of the English language. Reynard the Fox is published in 1481. One of the first books printed in the English language and one of the first bestsellers, is basically the originator of evil versus good. Reynard does basically everything evil. He has always been an evil character. He's always been a villain. He has murdered, and he has robbed. He has, tricked the government. He has, conned people. He has committed fraud. I mean, everything that you can do that is morally corruptible and considered evil, this character has done in the span of 842 years.
Wow.
It's crazy.
And so is there a clear kind of good in the story that he's opposed to, or does he not care, or why does he do it?
So he does it mostly because he is against the quote nobility, and the nobility are kind of good. Like, you see kind of why they're considered good. Like, they're the good in the story, even though they're also not good. So it's more of a evil in the sense of he is clearly evil, but no one is clearly good either. It's more about the he's kind of pointing at, see, yeah, I'm evil, but it's only because everybody else, they're just as bad as I am. So he's kind of a mirror to us.
Okay, so he's like, it's a morally gray world. There's no such thing as good and evil. He's that kind of guy.
Yeah. He's kind of like the moral of it is, if you find yourself behaving like this, you need to go back to church. Basically, is what it is.
Go back to church. Oh wow. Yeah, these Robin Hood type characters often will exist in a world where either they or these vigilante sort of like or thief hero type characters often just will reject the idea of good and evil entirely. They will say there's no such thing. Like, it's all just what you can get for yourself in this world, or something like that. Like, they often have this kind of fundamentally selfish point of view, but to them, it's not evil, because they don't buy into it.
There's a fantastic kids' book example, just to prove that not all kids' books are good versus evil. It's Artemis Fowl. Now, by the end of the series, he is pretty much a good guy, because one of the books is about him going back in time and seeing himself and realizing what a massive douche he was. But he starts off as villain. I mean, he kidnaps a fairy, for God's sake.
Right. Yeah, ultimately we can look at that series as basically this is the origin story of a good guy, but he starts on the opposite side of that and needs to sort of be walked through and sort of come to understand why to be good and how to be good.
Yeah.
I also like the idea of intentionally subverting our expectations by choosing a traditionally evil character and showing the story from their side, like Wicked. Right? There's a few. Wicked was the first one that sort of came to mind. That same author did another one called Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister, which was quite interesting.
Yeah, Disney have been doing it a lot. They did it with the villain of Sleeping Beauty.
Maleficent.
Another one where you see it and you see the sort of morally gray area that even those that are attempting to be moral from that particular perspective reside within, which is Interview with a Vampire.
Right.
Even the most moral character there is not particularly moral. He spends years and years killing. He gets involved with this sort of kid that they've turned into a vampire and spends years and years killing with her. Right. So he's not the most moral character by a long shot.
And there's
that's kind of an exploration of the levels of morality. What's truly immoral? What's not immoral? What is and then why is it that despite knowing these things, people will continue to desire to take those steps towards, right? Because they feel that there's a sense of immortality in it, right? There's an immortality in evil, and with vampires, it's a very direct thing. Right. I mean, with other things, it's a reputation that lives forever, right? So, just a thought about that as well.
So the reversal of the role, the heroic versus like kind of anti-hero thing, is about expectations, right? It almost works best if you have some kind of background. It's like there's a book called The Last Ring Bearer. It's a kind of fan fiction on the Lord of the Rings where the bad people are actually the elves, which just represents the status quo and the elitists, right? And the good people are actually the orcs and like Saruman, who's like advancing technology. They're killing trees, but also planting them, and then replanting them, and then they need it for technological progress.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, you can easily swap the point of view to the orcs and the goblins and say like. They are either like if we adopt more of their POV, you can either see how they could be sympathetic, or you could see how what they're doing could even, in a sense, be seen as heroic.
I wouldn't be me if I didn't mention Dexter.
Right.
In that one, he literally is the bad guy, and all the people that we're against, like Dokes when he starts getting close to catching him, in any other world would be the hero of the story.
Right, for sure.
But
Go ahead.
we cheer when he dies. Because Dexter didn't get caught.
Dexter didn't get... Oh, right, yes. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Thank you for your thoughts, everybody.
Blade Runner is another really good one where the hero is almost not a hero in a way, right? Because he's having this moral quandary. At what point do these things become sentient life forms? At what point am I committing murder? Right? I mean, that's the whole basis of that.
Yeah, stories where the character is now questioning their role in some sort of oppressive system they can act as that fallen hero type of story, or they start as evil versus good, but perhaps over time it is a character that comes to reject that evil role that they fulfill. A concept I wanted to look at is all heroes. And these are stories that don't really have villains. We mentioned survival stories, which often have this vibe. They usually feature protagonists that are united by noble intentions, even when their methods clash. Conflicts are going to arise from external or impersonal forces, such as the harshness of nature or an overwhelming situation, rather than from anyone acting explicitly, maliciously, or with selfish intent. We have this quote from Society of the Snow, which I think exemplifies this idea. "The knowledge that I have gathered is that there's nothing better and nothing that gives you more tranquility of spirit than offering yourself in love to another. This is the most important lesson I've learned, and through this that I feel at peace." Society of the Snow being a story of plane crash survivors that, although their methods do clash and conflict a bit, we could say, they're all trying to survive and save as many of each other as they can. So it's the only real villain there is the harshness of the situation and of the environment that they're in. And really, these stories can be much more tragic than ones that involve villains, because in stories with all heroes, there are still those that lose, or those that don't make it, or those that their methods weren't good enough to succeed, or maybe they oppose the heroes in trying to succeed, but one of them tries something wrong and they suffer the consequences. So these can be much more hard hitting and tragic, because in a world of only heroes, then we're kind of rooting for everyone. These characters are going to often be grappling with survival or self-sacrifice or the difficulties of collaboration. While disagreements do occur, they ultimately strive towards this shared goal and emphasize the human capacity for resilience and solidarity. These differences make these stories more poignant and at times more tragic, as I mentioned. And the endings are often pretty bittersweet, because while survival or success might be achieved, it often comes at the loss of their innocence or their initial principles or of certain relationships, because when heroes come to blows with each other and end up fighting each other, then there are casualties. Can anyone think of an example of an all-heroes story?
I guess
Any of those superhero stories fall into this category? You know, like Marvel, the Avengers, the superhero kind of stories.
Some do. Mostly just the Civil War arc is the only one that I can think of that actually features, like, hero versus hero. Almost every other superhero story has a clear villain, though. But you're right, there are some impactful ones that rise from this question of what happens when Captain America fights Iron Man, right? Like, they have some divide of principles between them that leads to a clash.
Apollo 13.
Yep, space movies tend to have this vibe.
Yeah, because they're all good guys. They're all trying to save, and it's versus, like, the environment, in that case, space. But then would you say that, I mean, I was trying to think, and I was going to say all disaster movies, but then I thought, well, no, because some disaster movies have selfish people who just want to protect themselves rather than helping everyone, and then they then become the barrier as well. Right. Like in Day After Tomorrow, not everyone there's a hero.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen that one, but yeah, there are sometimes those within survival scenarios that act in a more selfish fashion that puts them at odds with others. Or in something like in Train to Busan, like that's a zombie story, but you see how that has similarities to survival because it's like an external natural threat that we're all facing. It's pretty much all about the characters coming up against other people again and again who make selfish choices and lock them out of the train car. or they don't trust each other enough, or they push somebody else to the zombies instead of getting attacked themselves. So we can see a situation in which it's kind of like It's All Heroes, but they act so viciously towards each other that some of them do basically evolve into villains.
The Tower and the Glass Inferno, which is what the Towering Inferno is based off of.
Oh, right, yeah. That's a sort of big 70s disaster movie, kind of like the Poseidon Adventure, where we are in a big set-piece building, and we need to get to the bottom, but the fire is rising up through the levels. These ones where the characters need to collaborate and figure out the best way to survive and succeed. These are all going to have that all-hero quality to them, though there occasionally are going to be moments where they come up against somebody else.
That's one of my love of disaster movies.
Go ahead.
I'm just saying that's where my love of disaster movies developed as a kid. You know, I still love disaster movies. I guess that's why I want to write a disaster novel.
Right, that's a great reason to. Anybody else? Oh, too many. One at a time, please. Go ahead.
What about Lord of the Flies?
Lord of the Flies.
They're all heroes. They all they all get plane crash. They're all children, and they basically wind up fighting each other, go into the basic, good evil. But then they come back from where they go, and they're back to being kids again. So there isn't really a winner or loser or good or evil, but it's about inner conflict within yourself as far as goes. And it's not an established villain as far as goes. You don't know who to root for.
Yeah, that's a story where they all start out on the same side and on the same page, and then it's sort of about the ways that they devolve into tribes that do have some. I mean, there are those that want to kill the pig and drink its blood, and those that don't. And ultimately, I think that moment that we see that paradigm shift is when is his name Piggy, or do they just call him that? Is that just his nickname?
They're Piggy. So it's more definitively they're not all heroes at that point. Okay, my bad.
Right. You're totally right that it does start out that way. It starts out with all the characters like, we need to pull together and work together and survive. But then it sort of subverts that and becomes something darker by the end. It's about, and it's very much about that idea.
Absolutely. Sorry about that.
No, yeah, you're on the right track.
Would something like Independence Day count? Because technically the force they're fighting is an alien. It might be a being.
Yeah.
But it's not exactly depicted as being human.
I would say, at least, I haven't seen the second one, but the first one, like, we don't really I guess it does have villains, because we do sort of explore why the aliens are doing it a little bit. There's that one scene where he puppets and possesses that scientist, and the aliens are like, we want to exterminate you. And they're like, but why? And they're just like, because we're evil, basically. But, so, it's close, but we get just enough of the alien POV to think, no, there are villains here, I think.
Right. I suppose I was thinking, well, all the humans are heroes.
That's right. There isn't a human antagonist, exactly. You're correct. But there is this sort of...
CIA guy.
The
guy from the CIA.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess there are the occasional humans that get in the way. But as far as I know, there's no humans working for the aliens, in the first movie at least.
And then what about Jurassic Park?
That's a good question. I think in that one, it is sort of a man versus nature story, but ultimately the fact that we're fighting against the nature is the result of man's hubris and folly. So there is sort of like a villain, like there is a morally wrong side in Jurassic Park, which is the side of, forget the guardrails and the safety, there's a profit to be made here. You know, like that kind of like evil capitalist.
But you see, the book is different to the film, because the book he's like that, the guy who created it. But the film, he spared no expense. He's doing everything to be safety. Oh, but it's because of that other guy. The other guy brings down all of the electricity so you can get out with the, guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember that part.
Yeah,
but...
he was evil. In both the book and in the movie.
He has the can. He steals all of the embryos.
Oh, that's
right. Ned, whatever his name is. He
IT guy.
I guess he's the villain, because if it wasn't for him, it would have been perfectly safe.
Right. So yeah, there are villainous people in Jurassic Park throughout. There's a lot of sort of like heroes banding together to fight against this situation that they're in, but there are bad people too, and the series does have a sort of moral stance which is ultimately you should be careful with science and not go like just because you can doesn't mean you should exploit it for profit and things like that. So I think it does have a strong enough POV to say that there are villainous factions within it. But the dinosaurs are not really.
Well, I kind of look at the guy who created the amusement park as being unintentionally evil. Because he just doesn't realize that there are so many things that are going to go wrong, and he just, he thinks he's taking no precautions, but he hasn't.
He's completely different from the book to the film. So in the book, it's all about money, like the woman in Jurassic World. Whereas in the film, it was a discussion Spielberg had with the writer, and they wanted to make him much more of a grandfatherly figure, where his folly was relying too much on, or not relying, trusting too much on his co-workers to do their jobs properly, and therefore,
Can I jump in? I've been trying to get a word in. I listed like 100 movies in the chat, and I didn't get to shout out any of them. But moving on, I guess. I'll just read my list: Cocoon, My Neighbor Totoro, Angels in the Outfield, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, True Stories, and Dakota dropped a bunch too.
Great.
What did he drop?
Let's pull some
34th
examples
Street.
out. So you mentioned Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which is a road trip story. So yeah, travelogue stories where the characters are basically trying to get to the same place, but are encountering episodic challenges as they go. Those can be sort of all hero stories, and like we run into maybe like a villain at various stops or like various points, but there's not sort of one overriding villain. It's like the challenges of the trip are more what takes on that antagonist role.
Right.
Any other examples from those that you want to talk about?
Sure. True Stories. I don't know how to explain this movie. It's slice of life might be the closest genre. It doesn't really fit into a genre, but you see these just little vignettes of people living in this small town that's becoming a big part of America or something. It's really strange. But it's sort of like almost like a documentary, I guess, of just about individual characters.
Okay, so
with
sort
like
of
a
slice
narrator.
of life, like ensemble, everyone's pursuing different goals, but no one's really working against each other sort of thing?
Exactly.
Gotcha. Not something I have a lot of experience in, but yeah, that sort of story, like it might be that they have obstacles, but there's not really like villains, so to speak. Any others that you wanted to highlight or ask about?
I guess Angels in the Outfield is kind of confusing because there's no villain, but there are sort of like stakes. I guess the stakes are like, will this kid believe in God or not? This kid with a tragic life, I guess, is the stakes of that movie.
That's what that's about. I think that's a sports movie. I typically don't watch those, so that is out of my wheelhouse.
It's a little kid who's like born into, or he's in like a foster home with another little kid who's like, they both have tragic backstories. He's fed up with life and he doesn't believe in God, but he makes a desperate prayer, like, if the angels win the pennant, then I'll believe in you or something. And so he gets visited by angels, and it's a whole thing.
Really?
It's really just about him, like, finding a new dad, or like finding like Danny Glover is like his adopted dad by the end of the movie or something. I don't even know how to characterize this movie, but the stakes are not really about a villain at all. It's just, will this little kid be okay?
I see. Okay, interesting. And that sounds like it has some in common. It may not be in this genre, but the faith genre, in which sometimes it is, the character's own inability to grasp the correct faith, or their challenges in either in accepting it or believing in it, or like conquering their doubt or something like that is going to take on more of the central conflict.
Yeah, it's not my favorite movie at all, to put it mildly.
Yes,
but
I can guess why.
Probably for different reasons than you're imagining. It's
Oh,
just
could be.
it's just a mess. It's just the tone is all over the place, and it doesn't work as a sports movie. It doesn't work as like a family drama or whatever it's trying to be. It's just
You
not
just hate
great.
it all over.
Yeah.
Understood.
Lots of product placement, and I don't know. It annoys me.
Okay, understood. Well, thank you for those great examples. Let's look at some all villains. And Luke, while I have you, will you read this quote from Prosper's Demon by K.J. Parker?
Okay. I have an idea you aren't going to like me very much. That may prove to be the only thing we'll have in common, so let's make the most of it. I do terrible things. I do them to my enemies, to my own side, to myself. In the process, I save a large number of strangers, on average between 5 and 10 a week, from the worst thing that can happen to a human being. I'd like to say I do it because I'm one of the good guys, but if I did that, you'd see right through me. And then you'd quote the scripture at me, render no one evil for evil. Really? Even if they're the enemy? Even if they're not human? You decide. Not sure I can be bothered with it anymore.
Thank you for that. This is one of my favorite authors, and this is a novella that he's written called Prosper's Demon. There's 2 in this series. And this is about an exorcist in a world that kind of resembles like Victorian like society, I think. And he goes from place to place, and he's kind of like the Witcher. He exorcises demons and gets paid for it. But he doesn't care what happens to the people in the process. And in fact, if they get hurt, it's not that he enjoys it, but he will never go out of his way to help a person because he hates humans. He just hates demons more. So kind of interesting to be so deep in his head and to see like how much he justifies what he's doing, and how like the concept of it being bad has occurred to him, and he has weighed it, and he has decided, yep, that's the best option. So, only villain stories, everyone is morally ambiguous. I'm going to make the text bigger like I've been doing these past couple slides. Sorry about that. So, everyone is morally ambiguous, selfish, or outright awful. These characters are driven by either self-interest or power, or it could be survival, but they just don't care whom they hurt along the way. They're basically, they have less empathy or sympathy than others do. It creates a world where traditional morality is either irrelevant or directly weaponized against them. The characters in these might display loyalty or cunning or occasionally flashes of decency, but they're usually just tools to further their own agendas. We have books like The Black Company or First Law that follow morally compromised individuals that struggle for survival or personal gain, often against an equally corrupted backdrop. We have bad people fighting bad people in the name of selfish, harmful, and short-sighted goals. They may or they may not realize the futility of this. I mean, Glocta from First Law definitely does. It's basically his refrain. He's like, why do I do this? And he sort of changes his rationale for why he does what he does throughout the series. By the end, he's a different guy than he was at the start, but he's still a torturer and inquisitor that works for the crown. In terms of the outcomes, victory, such as it is, if there is anything that resembles victory, goes to the cleverest, most ruthless, or the luckiest, while the audience is often left to grapple with the absence of any redemption. This is movies like Reservoir Dogs, where like everyone is bad, everyone screws each other over, and at the end we've learned nothing, or we've learned that we should have been worse the whole time. The lack of a clear moral center challenges viewers to find some sort of meaning in this chaos, and as opposed to what some think grimdark is a really nauseatingly nihilistic genre. But in reality, grimdark stories can be celebrations of good because they present worlds where being good is in fact an impactful and challenging choice. In a world of only villains, the good people really stand out and make themselves into targets. And by continuing to be good, it's saying that only through great strength can they make those choices. Anybody want to comment on stories about only villains?
A lot of slasher movies do this, where they have a bunch of villainous bad guys getting hunted by an even more villainous monster.
Okay, what's an example?
Oh, yeah.
Deathbed, the bed that eats.
I'm so surprised that Deathbed is coming up in one of my classes. Any of these ones
You're right, though, Luke.
Go ahead, Becky.
Saw. Luke's right, Saw.
Yeah,
all the people that are put in the traps, they're not innocent people. Like, they've done stuff. That's why they're hunted.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Saw.
Okay.
Although the movies do definitely kind of have mixed messaging as they go on, at least the first couple are pretty consistent with this idea that Jigsaw chooses those that he views as having moral failings, and he puts them in these traps in an effort to sort of make them better in his own twisted way, or get them to appreciate what they had, or to make them stop doing the bad stuff at the very least.
Death game genre does this a lot as well.
Yep, Death Game being usually about strangers that are brought together in a competition to win some big prize, or sometimes just to survive. But they're drawn together because, sometimes it can be because they have these flaws or things wrong with them, or sometimes it's just the worst of humanity kind of emerges throughout the course of the game, so that by the end, even the previously good people have done worse and worse things to survive. So by the end, it may start as all heroes, kind of like Lord of the Flies, starts as all heroes, transitions to all villains.
Sometimes they just put villains in the death game because they're villains.
Oh yeah, that trope
I guess Saw
of,
would kind of be an example of that.
Yeah, there's that trope of the one that intentionally goes and signs up for the death game, of the guy in Battle Royale.
Oh, there's always one, yeah. Or somebody that they think the death game is preferable to real life, so they stay there. And oh man, I hate that trope, but it's part of the genre.
Right. And you mentioned even in Saw there is sort of this character that almost gets won over by the death game's philosophy, Amanda, who sort of becomes the new Jigsaw in a way.
Gangster movies.
Yep. Crime stories like Goodfellas and things like this usually are about bad people who get worse and worse. And usually they all get screwed over in the end. So you could look at the moral of that being crime doesn't pay. You should try to follow the right path. But sometimes those stories also say following the law doesn't pay either. Or there is no law. Like The Departed is the cops are just as bad as the crooks.
Yeah, or in Breaking Bad where, Hank's downfall, spoilers, is sort of, he becomes too obsessed with chasing down his target. It's I think it's the French Connection or something. I think that's where that idea comes from.
Oh, the idea that the hero gets sort of worn down into villainy by a constant pursuit of the villain and realizing that good isn't enough to win.
Exactly.
One of the things I really love about Breaking Bad, I haven't read the script, but at least the first episode, as you see that he has contributed to a Nobel Prize winning team, right? Yet he's teaching chemistry, high school chemistry. Then, of course, he finds out that, he's got cancer, and he's originally doing all of this to fund his cancer and put money away, so his family can be taken care of because he's got a disabled son. And then, in the end, he just wants to be the top gangster.
Yeah, exactly. I think that makes a good example of a fallen hero. Someone that starts with noble intentions, and then, let me make this text big, and then through either seeing that they sort of take to villainy in a way, like he sort of enjoys the rush of it and getting to do what he's good at, then he then starts liking it. Here we go.
Well, the fact that, he was on a Nobel Prize winning team, a guy I dated, his father is the head of a very prestigious chemistry department, right? And his work has actually been considered for Nobel Prize, right? The competition is so incredibly fierce, right? You see, if you understand this about that previous field, you see why he wants to become top gangster. Because it directly applies, the chemistry within that competitiveness directly applies. So I love the fact that they made him part of that, and yet then he's working as a high school chemistry teacher. Like, how the hell did that happen?
Right, that's a good point. He's ultimately, his sort of ambition is not to put away stuff for his money for his family. It's to win. He likes winning, and he wants to win no matter what that means.
And he worked at Sunspot. I've toured Sunspot for my company before, and it's high security. You've got to be the very best of the best to work at Sunspot. And I looked at that and said, how the hell did he go from Sunspot to working in high school chemistry? What happened? Anyway.
Right.
Sorry, I just kind of get a little emotional about that.
But that's okay. Thanks for jumping in. Let's look at fallen heroes. So often these are strongest it's going to be the most impactful change if your hero starts in a stronger moral position, because if they're just kind of okay and then they turn bad, that's not really a huge downfall. The bigger you are, the harder you fall, sort of thing. So these work best when they're sort of paragons of virtue. Think of the Two-Face character, who is like a heroic district attorney. He's like the antithesis of the villain that he becomes. He starts out as, completely committed to the side of justice. These heroes are defined by their moral strength and noble ideas, and often those exact ideals are the ones that get twisted, and that's what makes them become a villain. It is the fact that they are willing to do heroic things, but they sort of lose track of what to do those things for, or when to do those things, or to what extent, or like to what measures they should take in pursuit of those things. Harvey Dent is the Two-Face character, though Batman has a couple of good examples of this. I think Mr. Freeze is sort of an explored character in the live action space, at least. But so like Two-Face, for instance, he has this unwavering fight for justice that ultimately gets broken when he loses the person that's closest to him. And so that turns him into this sort of symbol of vengeance and twisted, inverted justice, with the coin and the burnt face thing kind of representing that idea of, the dark side of his same unflinching ideals. Boromir from Lord of the Rings is another great example of this, where, like, you might forget, because, like, especially watching the movie as a kid, you're just like, Boromir sucks. I hate him. I never trusted him, never liked him. But watching it as an adult and coming to appreciate and read about that and understand that character more, you really do start to get it, and even understand why he says things like, well, why don't we just use the ring? Like, that's not a crazy idea. The idea that this is the most powerful weapon in the world and we're facing the greatest opponent we've ever faced, wouldn't it just make sense to use that weapon against our opponent? And of course he doesn't see that, like, we the audience, we're like, no, the ring will corrupt everyone. Evil corrupts everybody. But he's like, not me, not us. And that's just a very human thing to feel, that although we've seen others fail or even fail to uphold the ideals that I hold the closest, I won't be the one to go down that path. And we can sort of relate to and understand how he's like, no, my family, my kingdom, we're good people. We won't do that. And although he does sort of fall down that path, he becomes corrupted and twisted by the ring and sort of comes to see Frodo as like an impediment to saving his kingdom. It all essentially makes sense. And the fact that even afterwards he feels so bad about it does make him feel like an impactful fallen hero, and his influence is felt all throughout the rest of the story. I had one more paragraph in this. Let me just bring up one more. Whoop. So the tragedy of this fallen hero lies in how their virtues are twisted into flaws, and I really recommend that Hello Future Me video on this if you haven't watched his essay on fallen heroes. He talks about this idea a lot. It's where I got some of these great ideas. So their stories are emphasizing the fragility of their idealism, or of just it sort of emphasizes the challenge and the strength of holding those ideals, because we watch characters that have them but then lose sight of why. Or they twist them and they start to imagine them from different angles, and they fall towards darker urges like selfishness or sadism or whatever it is, right? But these narratives ultimately remind audiences of that fine line, and how one can often sort of like, if just the wrong things happen to you, even a good person can go down that bad path. And we sort of may shift the weight of the narrative focus or dramatic argument to other characters on the same team who refuse to follow that same path, or we may stick with your hero all the way to the bitter end, in which case it's going to be just pretty much a tragic downfall. And Obi-Wan would be a good example of like, well, he's the hero that sees where that his friend is going, and he decides, I'm not going to go that way, and I need to stay good. And the way that we see them diverge is, and that like point of divergence between them, or that point of conflict between Obi-Wan and Anakin, is kind of at the heart of the whole series. It's saying, if we go back to the reasons why that happens, fear is kind of at the root of it. Giving in to fear is like at the root of the dark side. Anakin is so scared he's going to lose Padme that he's willing to do evil stuff to stop that from happening. Obi-Wan, on the other hand, is like, no, you can't ever give in to fear, because fear leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. That's the whole Jedi code. Anyone have a comment on fallen heroes that you've seen before, characters that you liked, why they work?
I have a question about it. The primal fear, where the lawyer is not a good guy, but he changes and goes and starts fighting for a client who he is for. And then he finds out that the whole thing was a lie, and he basically falls again as another fallen hero, as I looked at. as he realizes he basically let his client get away with something he did. Would that be an aspect of that, or am I looking at that wrong?
I haven't actually seen Is this the one where Robert De Niro is like stalking a family, or is that Cape Fear?
No. The book it's a book too, but the movie had Edward Norton as the client and Richard Gere as the lawyer.
Oh, that's right. And I vaguely remember this. This is something like there's a twist at the end that's like we keep going back and forth on wondering whether Edward Norton is guilty or not, and then right.
Or not. And basically, Richard Gere is not a good lawyer in the beginning. He is a corrupt lawyer, but he starts to put his faith in his client, which is Edward Norton in the movie. The book's good too. But he starts putting faith in his client that he's innocent, but towards the end, the twist is his client actually did do something. I don't want to give away the whole movie, you haven't seen it, but he basically lied about a big factor that basically makes Richard Gere walk off, and he goes back to being who he was.
Oh, he goes back to being corrupt and bad at the end?
That's what it kind of leaves it open to interpretation. The book's a little more definitive, but the movie kind of left it open for interpretation. But he basically lost all sense of self in what he did. And he walks off, and that's the last thing you hear is the laughter of him walking off.
Yeah, that's an interesting example. So, sort of at the end, he learns a bad lesson from what happened, and he ends up becoming a worse person, or he ends up sort of turning away from the good path and going back on the evil path.
Yes, exactly. It's not a happy ending.
Right. So yeah, that is definitely a fallen hero. It's just one where his downfall is almost like an epilogue to the story rather than being the meat of the story. So the fall can happen wherever you want, just like a hero. The opposite of this, the sort of ascended villain, can happen wherever you want. But if it happens earlier on, an ascended villain is probably an anti-hero because they learn their lesson right away or earlier. And if it's more like an epilogue, then it's probably a tragedy because it's like, oh, they only realize the truth when it's too late. So yeah, I think you're definitely on the right lines there.
One of my favorite examples.
This might be a little bit off, but I was thinking about
sorry.
how Gandalf.
Hello?
Whoa. I think there may have been a Discord glitch there or something. We had like 5 people talking at once for a second. Let's just do one at a time. I heard Luke first, so we'll start with Luke.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. One of my favorite examples is Yagami Light from Death Note because it's the ultimate example of like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. He's this, straight A sort of perfect high school student. He's the best possible person in the universe this Death Note could have fallen into the lap of. And he's like, oh, I'm completely incorruptible and pure and moral, and I'm only going to use this Death Note for good. And he has this rigid code that he follows, but he ultimately descends into this and becomes sort of like the most terrifying, prolific serial killer on Earth, and like every sort of government agency is trying to stop him. It's just great. Completely corrupts him.
And is he ever killing people for no reason though, or does he always have some good justification for why?
He has a good justification, but it is just ruthless and brutal and cruel, and he's just mass murdering entire prisons full of people, and he's taunting the police, and he becomes a serial killer in every sense of the word.
That almost sounds like he's starting to enjoy it.
Exactly.
Okay. That always adds an interesting wrinkle, doesn't it? Because, like, whether you enjoy what you're doing or not, it's kind of ambiguous whether or not that should play into the morality of what you're doing. But, like, if you have, for instance, let's say, a murderer, and we have him murder the worst murderers, and he loves every second of it, and so he's doing bad things for bad reasons, but it just happens to benefit us. Are we doing evil by making him do that? Like, it just adds such a wrinkle.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's very strong moral dilemma there.
Definitely.
Anyway, go ahead.
Thank you for that. I heard a couple other voices. I know it's tough to sometimes figure out, unless we use the text for comments, the order to speak in, but can just one, it's crazy to say, can just one person talk at once? Who else was trying to give a comment just now? Now nobody wants to speak and talk over each other. I just didn't identify who the speakers were.
Okay, I was trying to jump in. I didn't have an example of a fallen hero, but Gandalf has always made an interesting character study to me because it seemed so clear to me, especially in that one moment where he was talking to Frodo and Frodo tried to hand him the ring. and you could see him being pulled in by the ring. And that moment, I didn't know what it was as a kid, but after studying characters, it's clear that he doesn't want to become the fallen hero.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
a
he
great example.
sees that potential in himself, and he just doesn't want to go down that path. And so I've always loved or appreciated just studying the Gandalf character, because you see who he is, like the other warlock, I can't remember his name, but you can see who he probably was too, because they were friends, but he gave into that dark side of himself, and it's who he became. So not a fallen hero, but he has the potential to be, and he's vehemently resisting that side of himself.
Yeah, great point. Saruman is the other wizard that is in contrast to Gandalf, and they are old friends. And Saruman is this fallen hero because you can even tell from the color of the clothes they wear. In Middle-earth, the color of the wizard represents their sort of role or alignment, and so the white indicates I am aligned against the shadow, meaning I am one of the good guys. And so the fact that Saruman, the white, is the first to fall to Sauron and say, like, well, I think we're going to lose is the thing, and I don't like losing, and I don't want to die, so we just better join him, and then sort of joins the bad side and like embraces this selfishness. Gandalf does recognize the potential for that to happen to him too, because almost anyone can fall to, or literally anyone within this world can fall to the corruption of the ring. And so yeah, that's a great example how Gandalf recognizes that potential. He's like, I don't want to enter this war on the bad side. Eventually, he does enter it on the good side, though. When he is rebirthed as Gandalf the White, he is reimagining his role for his last stand on Middle-earth as one of the White Wizards, opposed to the Shadow, as opposed to the Grey, which is who he was before, the kind of neutral wizard that doesn't take a side. Was there another speaker? Go ahead.
I love what you added to that. That was good. I love what you added to it. I'd never thought through it that much, and I haven't really watched series or read it much, so I didn't know about all of those additional details, but that was really insightful.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, there's plenty I don't know as well. I love Tolkien and Middle-earth and stuff like this, but if there's like scholars that know all of the background and everything else, I'm not like an encyclopedia, but yeah, big fan. Let's look at, I think I may have heard one more voice. Let's look at another slide and then we'll just open it up to discussion on all these points. And I do have one more slide I want to look at on choosing evil. And then I have, if we have time, we have more slides that we could look at on introducing characters, the character and theme, and things like this. We could also do a little open lab and workshop time. We'll see what we have time for. Let's finish off with this slide on Ascended Villain, which is the opposite of Fallen Hero. And again, I will increase the text. So this is characters who begin with villainous traits or dark origins, who consciously choose to reject them. And these stories explore themes of redemption and free will and the triumph of moral agency over fate or nature. So Hellboy is just my favorite example of this. You even see in the picture, like, even visually, Hellboy is you can tell he has rejected his nature, because those two things on his forehead, some people think they're goggles. They're actually horns that he's broken off, and he continually sands them down with an electric belt sander. So not only has he rejected his villainous nature, or his purpose and origin, which was as NaNoWriMo, the sort of harbinger of the apocalypse. He's supposed to literally end the world with his big stone hand. He's supposed to stick it in an obelisk, and then it starts the rapture, basically, or the, cosmic horror rapture. But in any case, he's marked by that internal struggle as he confronts this aspect of his identity. He's like, I was born to do this. This is my destiny. This is what I was created for, but I don't want to do it. And he instead becomes a protector of humanity, breaking off his horns to visually show, I'm not a demon, I'm not going to do demon stuff. Blade is another example, this half-vampire who battles his bloodlust to fight against these very creatures he could have joined. And his villains are usually those who are so thirsty for this power that he must continually deny for himself. The standard Blade villain is vampire who wants to become super, super, super vampire, basically. And then lastly, on this concept of ascended villains, if this happens, I mentioned this a minute ago, if this happens near the start of a story, or in the, background for a story, or the opening credits of a show, then we are looking more at an anti-hero. If it's more towards the end, it's probably more tragic, where the character it's like too late to actually do the right thing despite their epiphany. These journeys are often going to be emphasizing these themes of redemption. Very infrequently will an ascended villain go back to villainy, but I guess we were just discussing with Kat a minute ago a story where he kind of does just this. Luke, did you have more of a point that you wanted to... Did you get interrupted and want to finish something, or did you have something else you wanted to bring up?
Oh, no, that was earlier.
Okay. All good. Anyone want to speak to ascended villains?
I have a question. Is there an ascended villain, like a novel or book that doesn't refer to like fantasy? I don't want to say fantasy characters or whatnot, but otherworldly characters, like something more humanoid, human as far as it goes. Because I'm trying to figure out which ones I've read.
That's a good question. Let's open it to the room. What realistic stories can you think of that involve ascended villains or bad people that make a choice to be good?
I don't know whether this is necessarily realistic, but on the point of like where it's a tragedy because it's too late, Shakespeare's King Lear is all about this king who says he doesn't want to divide his kingdom, so he's going to give it to the daughter that loves him the most. And the two older daughters decide to just like shower him with love, but it's all fake. And the youngest daughter says, I love you as much as I love you, no more, no less. In other words, I'm not going to pretend to love you more just to get the kingdom. And he is really brutal to her. Long story short, his rejection of her results in her being hanged, but he realises that she was right all along and loved him the most. But he realises too late because he wants to stop the hanging, only to find she's already been hanged, and the play ends with him clutching his dead daughter who loved him the most.
Ah, okay, so this is sort of like he realizes that he needs to make the better or the right choice, but too late. And because it's too late, that becomes the sort of theme. It's like, I should have realized this earlier. I should have ascended before I paid the price. Yeah,
when you say too late to actually do the right thing, despite the epiphany, that is exactly Shakespeare's King Lear. And the reason I say I don't know how realistic it is, I mean, obviously his plays were quite grounded because, well, they weren't really. Midsummer's Night Dream wasn't, but like King Lear is quite a grounded, play. So I didn't know whether it matches the realism because obviously it's like centuries old now, but...
Sure. Well, I have a couple other examples that I've just thought of in the meantime. Let's think, for instance, Schindler's List is about a high-ranking member of the Nazi Party that he's making lots of money off of Nazi policies and war manufacturing until he sort of realizes the cost of what he's doing, and he's sort of forced to confront these horrors, and he sees the massacre at the ghetto, and he sees all these awful things happen. It breaks down his defenses until he realizes, I have to do the right thing, I have to redeem myself, and I have to be good. Anybody else? Can you think of another ascended villain story?
Just that, oh my god, that red jacket.
Right, yeah, that
the scene with the little girl in the red jacket.
Right, and I think particularly that was used to show that this is like the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? We portray this character differently because this is the moment that our character ascends from villainy and says, I can't continue on this path.
For people who haven't seen it, basically it's a black and white film. There's this little girl who's running in a red coat, and the red is in colour. And then later on you see a dead body or a pile of dead bodies, and on the top is this red coat. And the reason Spielberg said he made that colour was because that is what the character sees. Everything, he's dead to it all, but he sees this red coat, and it sticks in his mind, it traumatises him.
Right.
I would also
submit more family.
That
Go
it's
ahead.
black and white because it is good and evil, but the blood the red jacket is blood.
Yeah, the symbolism there could easily link to blood, for sure.
I've got an example, family-friendly example, The Mighty Ducks.
Okay.
The protagonist is a lawyer, and he's a rich prick of a lawyer, and he goes out drinking and driving, and he's just an asshole, and he gets a ticket. And in court, they sort of assign him community service that leads to him coaching a little league hockey team. and that makes him sort of grow as a character and become the hero.
Interesting. And isn't that a PG, like family kind of oriented movie from the
Yeah.
80s?
It's like, yeah, and along that lines, there's Liar Liar, where he's a lawyer, and he's been getting these people off, and he basically ends up, he can't lie on stand. So he's a lawyer who suddenly can't lie, and he has to be the good guy.
That's an example of the story is all about them eventually ascending from their villainy, but they have to like be put through the ringer and really like learn the lesson before they make the right choice.
The other one that I was thinking, as Luke was talking about it being the more family-friendly ones, is Spielberg's Hook. In case you can't tell, I'm a massive Spielberg fan. But that is about, Robin Williams plays adult Peter, who's gone into adult things, who isn't a particularly devoted dad to his children. And, there's one scene I remember where the kid's playing up, and he's like, "Why are you acting like such a child?" And the kid responds is, "I am a child." Like, it's that kind of... But his journey returning to Netherlands to save his kids from Hook, because Hook's gone and stolen them, he then recaptures his youth. Like, it's not like Liar Liar, where he's been put in a situation to be forced to go through it. He has a choice to go and rescue his kids, and he goes back and he rediscovers his... But I would say he's quite... maybe not villainous in the way that we think of these big bad villains, but he's a villain to those kids because he's an awful dad at the beginning.
Yeah.
They've gone away on this holiday for Christmas and he's completely ignoring them.
Yeah, he's sort of done, he kind of grew up, but like not in the physical way, yes, but in the bad way that the story was always sort of about. It's like you grew up and stopped, you lost your connection to children and either your own youthful imagination or your own just sense of playfulness or your sense of like childish things. He's lost touch with that, which these like kind of legacy sequels are kind of like, there's a Christopher Robin one that's also kind of like this, isn't there?
Yes, yeah, literally called Christopher Robin.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's about the sort of child who had the big adventure sort of in the years afterwards. They've forgotten why they had that, or like they've lost touch with what they gained or learned from the adventure. And so the story is about them rediscovering that. And therefore they do start as like not necessarily a villain, but kind of like as someone that has failed to apply the lesson they learned before.
The first Mary Poppins, because the whole film about the making of Mary Poppins, saving Mr. Banks, tells us the story was never about Mary Poppins and the children. It was always about Mr. Banks, who again had gotten into the world of money and lost his childhood and therefore was a very neglectful parent.
Right.
Can't see a theme here.
True. Thank you for those comments.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
Okay, is it still an ascended villain if they're forced to be good? Like, if they're a villain, then something happens where they have to do good, where the gods and it goes against their very nature.
I would say that I would not consider them ascended unless doing that like unlocks something in them, and then they come to see, I guess that was the right thing to do. Because if they're like, if it's like a situation where you put a gun to a bank robber's head and you're like, here, pet that puppy, and he's like, okay, I'll pet the puppy. Like, I just don't really give them credit for making an internal change. Whereas an ascended villain is mostly about that change of heart, not so much about like the change of what they're doing externally.
Okay, got it.
Would you say Liar Liar is an example where that can work? It's forced upon him, but he does then learn, and then after the spell or whatever it is broken, he continues being a good person.
Yeah, exactly. So initially the change is forced upon him, and the story is mostly about him struggling to get back to normal. He's like, I want to go back to being my old shitty self. It's like an Ebenezer Scrooge type of story, where you force somebody to see, here's all the reasons why you're bad, and most of the story is them going, la, 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 no, I'm not, like, it's not that bad, I'll go back to how I was happy that way. But they sort of come to realize maybe either I wasn't happy that way, or I've been hurting others that I didn't realize I was hurting, or there's just some cost to this that I wasn't fully reckoning. And therefore, at the end, the choice of is this going to be a tragic or hopeful ending is going to be, do they understand and apply that lesson and make that change? Or do they double down and become like, no, I will be even worse than I was before?
I don't know how I forgot about A Christmas Carol. That's the ultimate example, because Scrooge is, well, he's a Scrooge. Like the name Scrooge, the term Scrooge comes from him. And I'm studying that with my student. I should have thought about that first. We've spoken about how it's like the redemption of a villain. That's what the whole arc is.
Yeah.
The forced redemption of a villain.
For sure. But by the end, he does make those choices on his own.
He does it because he's learned.
Right.
Because if it had just been Marley coming back, that would have been him doing it out of fear, and that's not correct. It's him having to relive his future, see how people see him in the present, and then see the future of all the people he knows.
Right.
That then makes him go, I need to be a better person.
Exactly, yep. All right, I'll do one more slide, then we will go into... I'll see if we have some open lab. If anybody has projects to work on, then we can look at some outlines or answer some plot questions or things like that. And if not, then I do have just a couple more slides on introducing characters just in terms of the prose. So I just wanted to bring this up. I don't necessarily have too much to say on this yet. This is just a question, or just an interesting point that I liked a lot. And in the newer Star Wars movies, I think that largely the trilogy is an absolute mess, but there are some really good ideas in there. And one of the most interesting ideas in there is centered around this character of Kylo Ren, whom I know this is a novel class, but more people have seen, you can count that more people have seen movies than they have read individual books. So I think that, at least in the first movie, and like the idea of Kylo Ren is kind of brilliant and kind of adds a new dimension to both the light side and the dark side, which we talked about before as being this binary choice that can be presented as a very obvious and easy choice, especially in these more kind of action-adventure, video-gamey, comic book style worlds where we don't want to think too much about the choices that the characters are making. And we don't want to ever present like, well, maybe they should go down the path of the dark side. I thought that there's an aspect of this character which is cool. Unlike many villains who succumb to selfish desires and corrupted ideals, we see Kylo kind of consciously fight against the temptation of the light side, which is the first time that really comes up in that franchise at all. His own self-inflicted anger, there's this great scene where he gets injured and he starts just punching his own injury to try to like generate pain and anger from himself, demonstrates the dark side in a new light that we hadn't seen before. It's like a path of deliberate and painful commitment, and that sometimes a character an otherwise rational character might sort of choose the dark side, all things considered, because it would bring them closer to their goals, and despite the fact that it's difficult, that is kind of a fascinating idea. Like, there's it makes the bad side seem like you could say a little bit more sympathetic in a way, because we see how anyone can sort of fall to that end, like Anakin kind of did. But it also, I think it makes us see the good side as more good, because it makes just that choice of evil seem less obvious. And to see this sane, rational person make this choice kind of fleshes out both sides of that paradigm. And instead of evil as purely like a failure or an addiction or a possession, like it does sort of work like those things sometimes, it clarifies how being good and doing the right thing isn't necessarily just like a so obvious, duh, easy, of course you would do that. So I really like that aspect of it. We've seen so many light side characters tempted by the dark, but to see a dark side character tempted by the light, just to me fleshes out both sides and just brings an incredible new dimension to the series. Does it sustain that for 3 movies? No. No, it goes random directions and doesn't make sense. Okay, let's stop for just questions on anything we've talked about, and we'll see if we want to do any open lab. So any questions about all these ideas of protagonist, antagonist, hero, villain, and anything in between? Okay, if not,
I'm
go
wondering
ahead.
what your thoughts are about. I totally just lost the name of it. What is the anti-hero in All Red? What's his name?
The anti-hero in All Red?
Yeah.
From Star Wars or from what movie?
Ryan Reynolds. Ryan Reynolds.
Oh, Deadpool.
Yeah. So I remember when that first came out, it seemed like it was a mind-blowing moment. Like, oh my God, the anti-hero. It seemed like it was such a brand new thought, but I don't think that it was. Have we had the anti-hero before then? Did he exist? Why was this version of the anti-hero? And I guess it sort of ties into what we're talking about because he's sort of a villain. But why was that so significant to us? I guess in terms of entertainment history. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure.
I think it ties into what we're talking about today, but I've always wondered, but not been able to make the connection.
Okay, sure. So just to be clear, I haven't seen the Deadpool live-action movies, but I'm familiar with the character. Have played video games and read comic books and seen things like that with Deadpool in them. So I do know about the character. So why was that? So to begin with, we've had anti-heroes for like almost the entirety of the time we've had storytelling. I don't think that was a brand new concept in general, but maybe just packaging it in that irreverent of a way really appealed to people. Maybe I think the charisma of the character is a huge part of why people like him. People just love Ryan Reynolds. I mean, love him or, like, if you ask any individual person, you'll get some that are like, I hate Ryan Reynolds. But like on the whole, clearly audiences and worldwide audiences around the world find him very charming. And so you show a charming person that has a high level of competence, like he's good at fighting and like he's funny. So we have a character that has a unique perspective too, I think is an important part of why people like him so much. The fact that he kind of has this ability to play with the fourth wall, I think people really responded to. Maybe that was kind of something not that many people had seen in a major mainstream movie, perhaps, or maybe at least not in a Marvel movie. So I think some combination of those things is why people really do respond to Deadpool. That in conjunction with just really over-the-top kinetic visual action, like it's a character that he is capable of a lot, so you can put him in lots of different types of action scenes. He's basically invincible, isn't he? And has a good array of like acrobatic moves and gadgets, and it's just like fun to watch him fight bad guys and do stuff, combined with the likability of the actor, the humor that the character, like the sort of very irreverent, almost, maybe this is taking too far, but I would say along the lines of that kind of edgy humor we'd see on things like Family Guy, Adult Swim. That sort of like screw everyone kind of mentality is just like really appealing to audiences when you package it just right. And all those things together, I think, just brewed up into a really successful franchise. That, and you do that with $100 million marketing campaign, and you'll have a hit movie. But I haven't seen it, so maybe anybody else can weigh in on why they think that was such a successful franchise.
I'd like to weigh in a little bit.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I can't hear. So they have the words coming out. But as far as it goes with Deadpool, I've read the comics long before the movies came out. He's a vigilante that we root for. At least most people who do want to root for him, because he does things we always wish we could do. Take out the bad guy, but not feel bad about it because we're doing the service to the world and we're saving people. And the actual thing is, he always has something to fight for, the woman he loves. Even in every movie they did present that. Back in the day, he was a bad guy back in the comics with Wolverine at some points. But at the same time, he's a bad guy, but as we that gives us kind of his head and also relate to want to do that sometime. I think in the inner one, just take on the world and take on all the bad guys and not feel guilty about it, and not have any repercussions, even though we know repercussions are going to come eventually. But in the end, he always comes out on top. It's another factor that I think is amazing.
Yeah, Deadpool is aligned against worse villains than him, so that's sort of easy to root for. He's never like, kicking puppies. At the end of the day, he makes the right choice, even though he might do it with a smirk and with a dumb joke. Like, he's never going to do something horribly sadistic against good people.
I think that, Connor, your analysis was right on. I would say the other thing is that he is a sympathetic hero, kind of anti-hero. I mean, he's been burned up. He loses I'm sorry to spoil it. He loses the love of his life for a while, and so he's sort of like I'd say it's a comedic version of John Wick, if John Wick were supposed to be like a Marvel anti-hero,
Right. With a sense of humor.
So, but with the wisecracking, and that's one of the things I love the most about him is like, yes, I may not be a superhero, but I definitely am a smart ass.
Right.
Anyway, but yeah, I mean, I'm not going to mock you for not seeing Deadpool, but I just think you should see it. I think it's worth seeing.
Okay. Yeah, I've had it recommended to me. I'm sure it's pretty good. Thank you for those comments,
Oh
guys.
yeah, it's great.
Okay. Should we go ahead?
I was just saying, I've got the current book that I'm working on, something that's not quite that hasn't quite sat right with me is that we don't. I mean, I suppose the way I've written it, the villain is obvious, but the kid doesn't really know who the villain is until the midpoint, because she's working with him. I just didn't know whether that's an issue or not.
Well, it might be. Is there a clearly defined problem that the character is working to solve?
Yeah, she's trying to bring her sister back to life.
Right. Okay. And with pressing and urgent stakes, so we can tell that if you don't act quickly, then something bad will happen?
Yeah, her sister's fading and her uncle is either unable or unwilling, she's not sure which, to do anything about it to keep her sister's spirit, her ghost, on the earth much longer.
Okay.
So basically she goes and works with this guy because this guy's saying, I can bring your sister back. And her uncle hasn't helped her with her dilemma, so...
Well, I think you have enough of a dynamic and challenging situation that you don't exactly... I mean, especially if it's at the midpoint we sort of realize there is some sort of entity or villain behind this. You're probably in fine shape, but if you wanted to, you could portray the uncle as a sort of false villain more to begin with, if you wanted to give it more of that vibe. Sort of make it seem like he's more sinister.
I did try that, and it didn't really work, because that's not really his character. He's more of a hindrance than an outright villain.
Okay.
He comes across more as an obstacle rather than outright villainy. So
does the uncle character, does he disagree with the girl being at his house at all?
What, the ghost?
No, I'm sorry.
The
girl, the main character. Does the uncle not want her there?
No, he wants her there. He absolutely wants her there. He's interested in her gift in speaking to ghosts. His thing is that he's trying to get her to accept that her sister needs to move on, because if ghosts stay on Earth too long, they become something other, something darker. They either lose themselves and become just like a wandering, aimless entity, or they turn vicious and become poltergeists. So he's trying to convince her that she needs to let go of her sister and let her sister move on. And he's saying there's nothing he can do to keep her sister there longer. And then along comes this other guy who says, I can bring her back to life.
Right. Yeah, I'm just wondering, what is the uncle's actual expectation here? That she'll just live with me and we'll just hang out and I'll slowly convince her to let go?
Well, his aim, he had a feeling that she'd be bringing her sister with her, but he didn't know for certain. His aim is that he has always wanted her to eventually, when she becomes an adult, join the society that he belongs to. She was the one that requested to come and stay with him when she was 11, because she was hoping he'd help her sister. He always intended for her to move to England as an adult and for him to offer her to join. So when she says she wants to come, he wants to help her. He genuinely does want to help her. But from his perspective, there is nothing he can do. Because, but she doesn't know that. She's questioning whether he's just being you don't like ghosts, therefore you don't want her here.
Right. Okay. Well, did we address your question, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think as long as it's we kind of know not to trust a necromancer. He's a necromancer, for goodness sake. It's going to be obvious.
Right. For the adults in the crowd, at least.
Well, actually, even for the kids, they play Dungeons and Dragons just as much.
Right. Yep, they might know. They might know the implications for sure.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll just sort of pick up the wariness she has, so we know that he's not necessarily good. We just don't know how evil he is until the midpoint.
Sure.
Maybe that's better.
Yeah, you leave some more ambiguity around it. I think it works.
Oh, simple is good for middle grade.
For sure. Hope that helped.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, I figured out what I'm having a problem on with my story, and that's the main character is too innocent and too simple, not simple like simple-minded, but too basic. She's too innocent, she's too one-dimensional, there's no flaws with her character. And it basically is, she winds up going to art school, like I said, I think you know a little bit about it, art school, and she tried to find a way to pay for it, so she makes a deal with someone who is a housemate with her to a whole nother element of lifestyle. But with that being said, how do you definitively design a character with flaws if you want her still, that character to still appear like she has in sin, that's out fully innocent?
I think we're losing your voice just a little bit towards the end, but I think I heard most of the question. So how you're trying to add interesting flaws or dimensions to a character that's too innocent?
Interesting flaws, but interesting flaws because I don't want my character. I think what the problem is with my character, she's too innocent that she's boring. She has autism, that's interesting. She has certain terminology, that's interesting. But as far as flaws, because autism is not a flaw, but as far as flaws go, I don't know how to make them not small, but make them small enough to show a difference between where she's going to how she is now.
Okay, and what does your character want again?
She wants to find a way to help pay for school at art school.
She wants to find a way to pay for art school. Okay.
Yes.
And what's stopping her from doing that?
She's doing it on her own. She has enough funds to go for a little bit. She just got into art school, so she, as far as it goes, she is trying to find a job, this and that, and she gets an offer that's too good to pass up, even though she tries to not get in this deal, which is basically becoming part of the BDSM scene as one of the subs. So it's not prostitution or anything like that. But as far as it goes, it's still to basically help her pay for school. And if she agrees to this, and also is supposed to help her with the artworking, which everyone's telling her she's not very emotionally involved, but it's all technical. So she's trying to better her artwork as well as pay for school. That's where the role is.
Okay. So maybe your character needs some sort of other option available to them. Like if you, especially if you're trying to say they're going to choose a less than desirable path to getting what they want, then you have to, I would think, show them trying the more reasonable paths first, or they would try more like the things that most people would do, and then there would be a reason that those things wouldn't work, and those reasons might be due to some problem with herself. Maybe she's way too enthusiastic and wants what she wants so badly that she can't moderate herself. She has no self-control. Maybe she has no restraint, or something like that. Or I would just ask yourself, why don't the traditional pathways work? Is it just because society is aligned against her, or is it because there is something about her that's getting in her own way? You would look for some interesting reason that she would need to sort of turn, or feel that she needs to turn to those darker or more unsavory paths to getting her way, because she's tried everything else. And I think the way that she responds when she tries the normal paths, or the sort of more traditional ways through this, will sort of reveal to us what's different about this person. Why did she have to go this alternate, very different route? I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Thanks for the great question. We have time for one more question.
I have a question. With the membership for the 90 days boot camp, thing. If you need to, or membership in general for the, all the classes that you guys offer, if you need to pause your subscription anytime, you have the ability to do that.
Yeah, you can pause.
What do you do? Just reach out to contact to support.
Yeah, well, me
Just
and
email
Nacho,
support?
we're the company, so you can message me or message Nacho or email at any time, and you can pause your subscription. You can come back later, whatever you want to do.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for the question. And if you're just hearing about this for the first time, maybe you missed the beginning of the video, but this is part of Novel Bootcamp, and this is the last free class in this course. There's like a bunch more weeks of this coming up. This goes all the way to end of February, and is going to follow you writing your entire book from start to finish. You're going to finish that first draft around February 1st. So we hope you guys do sign up. Scriptcamp.net is the website. You can sign up for membership either monthly
When's the next
or
one
yearly.
start, Connor?
The next one will be starting in February.
I misunderstood. In February. Okay.
Yes.
Hey, Nacho, that's when I'll be starting. I've got to get my life together. Like, I thought that you guys were just kind of hanging out, but you're serious about working.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I need to get ready for you guys, Connor. So I need to get some things in order and clear my schedule a little bit and just, be ready to focus on this. But anyway, yeah, this has been amazing. I'm so glad that I was able to catch the last free class.
Yeah, no problem. And I will say also, like, although it is a boot camp that's designed to like take you through a book, it's okay if you're also just learning the skills. And so like you wouldn't like be falling behind, or there wouldn't be any like reason why you can't just attend the classes just to sort of like organize and to get your ducks in a row before you get going. So it's up to you. If you want to join it in the next boot camp, that's of course totally fine.
I can do that.
Go ahead.
You're not going to make me feel like a failure if I don't get my homework done.
No, we don't kick
That's
you
what I
out.
was concerned about.
No, we will not kick you out if you're not writing enough
That
notes
homework
or
week.
whatever.
I just want to say something as a word
And
of
I think I'm
encouragement.
going to go ahead and join. I think I'm going to go ahead and join, and just as long as you're okay with that.
Of course.
And I'll just sit and like learn, and then I'll start officially in February. But I'll go ahead and pay Nacho, and I'll go ahead and sign up. This is awesome.
Great.
I just
Yeah, we'd
wanna-
love to have you. Thank you. Go ahead, Becky.
I just want to also add for to Alicia, I didn't complete my novel in the last boot camp, and I'm still here, so you're good.
Yeah. Not everyone
Statement
finished.
too nice though, Becky.
I
let's
just want to say that
Go ahead.
I talked to Connor last week about how my Parkinson's is really affecting me, and and he told me, he said, just don't give up. And I haven't completed my novel, and I've been here over a year, so don't give up, okay?
Thank you for that.
I have a question for Connor.
Inspirational.
Go ahead. I'll take the question.
Oh, my question for Connor was, oh my God, I got a brain frog now. Something I was gonna ask you. Oh yes, when I pay the $29 a month, these free classes, will that be something I can come back and listen to again? Cause I just got in on the tail end of the third class.
Yeah. All of these.
And you give a lot of good information
Yes.
here about the character. Look, I've taken screenwriting classes before, but it never was quite broken down to me in this sort of way with the characters, the anti-hero and the ascending villain. I never got into it. It was just really basic 3-act structure, how to write a 3-act structure screenwriting play, but never in this format like this. So I found this very informative. That's why I want to know if you'll get access to go back and listen to all those free classes when you join with the $29 a month.
Yeah.
I see you do screenwriting boot camp, a novel, film writing, filmmaking, and writers lab and advanced lab, and then and I see other things too. You have script consultation too as well.
Yeah, great
in
question.
that as
So,
well.
yeah, we have. If you remember, you have access to video library, which includes access to recordings of all previous classes from the past 3 years.
That sounds great. Thank you, Carl.
No problem. Thanks for the question. And we definitely do cover things like 3-act structure and like very technical craft-focused structure stuff as well. But we cover a big variety of topics. If you go through the video library, you'll see classes in everything from musicals to westerns to sci-fi, slasher movies, everything. We cover a lot of ground. Any other questions, thoughts, or comments before we wrap up today?
Oh, Connor, I need to send you a message after class.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for that. Or you can email Connor at scriptcamp.net.
Oh, okay. Well, can I just send you a message here?
Yeah, Discord's fine.
Okay, would you prefer I email you?
Either way, it makes no difference to me, whatever you prefer.
Okay.
Thanks for that. Okay, we are at the end of our time for today's class. We have lab later from 4 to 6. If you're a member, you can come by with up to 5 pages of a script or up to 1,500 words of manuscript for feedback, or just any other questions or topics that you'd like to ask about. We have ongoing boot camps, including Nacho, are you still here?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to confirm. So tomorrow is the start of new feature boot camp, is that right?
Yeah, tomorrow is writing dark comedy.
Dark comedy, okay. So yes, we're moving feature writing to Sundays from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific, and then TV is going to move to the Friday slot from 6 to 8 p.m. on Fridays.
And there are 2 different labs. So this is one of the pretty amazing resource. I mean, I don't know where you guys are in your projects, but I found sometimes I was struggling a bit with, outlining just, a certain part of a story, just sometimes even struggling with something for months. And Conor is just he's written so many scripts and novels, and just part of pitching your, just to be in the running for a writing gig, you often have to break a story really fast, come up with an idea or come up with a take on adapting a novel, and really quickly develop the whole plot. And I think Conor's just done it so much that he's really fast. So it's, the writer's lab is where you can bring your project, whether it's a novel or a script or whatever, and really get help from, a really experienced pro writer who can sort of break things down in minutes that sometimes you might be struggling with for a long time, at least in my experience. And also, I found, you can bring pages of your script or whatever, and just, so that's a really valuable resource. And you have 2 different writers labs per week with Conor Fridays and Saturdays.
Thanks, Nacho.
Nacho, can we also quickly plug if we're going ahead next Saturday with mine?
Yeah, so a brand new YA and middle grade writers group, which is going to be meeting at 10 a.m. Pacific on Saturdays. That's 1 p.m. Eastern. I think 6 p.m. UK. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's next Saturday the 20th, right?
Mm-hmm.
Starts next Saturday, yes.
All right, 10 a.m.
Yeah, and a
Pacific
couple of you
next
guys
Saturday.
had
Thank you
mentioned.
for that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No worries. Just saying, I'll be there. So that next Saturday, 10 a.m. Go ahead, Nacho.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just a couple of you guys had mentioned you're working on erotica projects. So we may, if you're interested, we may consider just creating a channel, an 18+ channel or something, where you can share and get feedback on your adult fiction. I guess it's not adult fiction. 18+ fiction.
Thanks, Nacho. Okay, we're going to wrap up there for now. Anybody coming to lab, we'll see you at 2 p.m. or perhaps see you for feature screenwriting tomorrow at 11 a.m. or for the table read tomorrow, or for any number of groups or events tomorrow. Check the events tab on ScriptCamp or WordCamp if you want the full list of everything coming up. We'll see you guys soon at your next class or event.